Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 2, Episode 19. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. We've discussed on this very podcast the concept of manifestation, the concept that what you put out into the universe, you bring back. And there's a lot of literature about manifestation. There's podcasts, there's YouTube videos. All of it is very positive, as well it should be. The issue with manifestation that we don't often address is the fact that whether we're doing it intentionally or whether we're doing it unintentionally, we are always manifesting. Manifestation is a product of intention, but it is also a product of our assumptions, our preconceived notions, the way that we see the world. And the way that we see the world predicts how the world will manifest to us. So we are going to discuss unintentional manifestation and its ugliest form: lies, deceit. Depending on how you see the world, it's stark and ugly. I happen to find it beautiful and revealing, the realization that no one has ever lied to us, ever. We create a space for things to enter our life through our unintentional manifestation. And when we create that void, when that vacuum exists, those things come in and fill that space. The concept of having been lied to is often an excuse we tell ourselves to justify what we have brought into our own lives, what we have either intentionally or unintentionally manifested. Once again, I appreciate you all. Thank you for listening. Please review, like, subscribe, thumbs up, all of that. I do appreciate it.
Act 1. No one has ever lied to us.
The easiest and most appropriate place to start a segment on lying, on lies, on deception is with oneself. I'll take you back to August of 2021, where I was in Costa Rica, where I was sitting with ayahuasca, where I received a number of messages. I tried to be as forthright as I could about the things that happened to me while I was going through that journey. If you've listened to the segments that I did on the 4 nights that I sat with Mother Aya, you'll know that the messages you received are often in the voice that you speak to yourself, and they may not be direct messages. They may be vague, open to interpretation. You may be presented with a number of possible outcomes that you certainly don't want to occur. These negative possibilities that you may actually realize if you continue to think the way you think, act the way you act. Some of the messages are much more direct, much more blunt. And the message that I received about lies, about deception, this was a blunt message. The reason why I haven't addressed it until now is because I rejected it. I did not want to accept, that's probably the best way to say it, I did not want to accept that this was not only my reality, but it was the reality. There were several times, not just once, dear listener, there were several times where I was going back and forth in an argument with myself. It's basically your ego then trying to deny things, trying to reassert control. And one of the things that came through me, and did several times, was, that was you. Now, in reference to what did I receive this message? It was usually in some perceived slight or where I felt like people were being disingenuous with me. They were lying to me. They weren't being honest with me. And I would get completely and totally contradicted. No, that was you. No one lies to you. You lie to yourself. Well, I didn't like that. Didn't sit well with the ego, didn't sit well with anything, so I, of course, rejected it. And I kept trying to rationalize why I was getting this message. After the journey, coming back home and sitting with some of the things that I was exposed to, starting a different type of path in analyzing myself, analyzing the way that I see the world, analyzing my own actions, It's true. No one's ever lied to us. No one's ever lied to us, dear listener. We lie to ourselves. How do we do this? We lie to ourselves through the assumptions that we make about the situations that we're exposed to. We often come to a preordained conclusion. We've already made our mind up, and then the situations that occur to us in our lives present, and they fit into the box that we've already created. Longtime listeners of the podcast may be thinking, okay, you've said things like this before. This is a familiar refrain. But I'm putting it in the context now of something that I have personally rejected, and I think even as I'm discussing this on this segment, many of you are probably rejecting. By building this box, by building our paradigm of how the world actually operates, we are drawing things towards us. We are asking for something and then we're getting it. In the context of asking and receiving, if we don't like the outcome of what we've asked for, what we've gotten, we will often then rationalize by not condemning the way that we approach the situation, the assumptions that we made, the conclusions that we had already drawn. We blame the other person. And the easiest way to blame the other person is to say, that person deceived me. I was lied to. I came in with the purest of heart, the cleanest of hands, the most golden of intentions, an innocent babe in the woods, vulnerable, ready to be taken advantage of by the scoundrels, the professional deceivers out there in the universe. This is a myth. This is simply not true. When you hear a phrase like, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it, it often sounds so stupid, so contradictory, it's hard for you to accept that this is actually sage advice. The reason why it's sage advice is because you haven't analyzed the assumptions that you've made. You haven't analyzed the conclusions that you've already drawn before you've been given all the evidence. So you don't know the things that you're actually desiring, the things that you're wishing for, the things that you're trying to draw into your existence, the things that you want to manifest. You don't know that these things aren't terrible for you, aren't going to actually cause you more problems than they would solve. And the easiest way to justify your desires consistent with your worldview and that you can't be wrong in those things is to say, it's the other. It's external. That person lied to me. These people are liars. A good example is relationships. We all, no matter who we are engaged in relationships, whether or not it's with family or friends, a romantic relationship, a business relationship. We create the parameters of these relationships in our mind, what they mean, we label things, and then we place expectations on people. And there's two big things right here, dear listener. There's the expectations that we place on people that are not met, and then there's the outcome of the relationship within those expectations not producing the feelings that we want. The first is the most prevalent. It's placing expectations on people and then getting disappointed and feeling like you've been deceived when they haven't met your assumptions, your preconceived notions, your expectations of how they're going to act, who they're going to be. We all do this. We all do it. And it's okay if you see that you're doing it. If you can realize that a lot of the emotions, the negative emotions that you're experiencing in those relationships, it's you. It's not them. They're just being them. What is it in you that you're so attached to? What kind of expectations do you have that are reasonable or unreasonable? The second is more interesting. I don't know that it's as prominent, but it's certainly more interesting. It's that when you get everything that you want and you look at the way you feel after all of these things have manifested, the day that you're walking in that moment and you realize, I don't like this, or this sucks. I'm actually more unhappy in this present relationship than I was when I was so desiring the manifestation of this relationship, when I was so in that state of want. I got everything that I wanted, and it didn't make me happy. In fact, it made me unhappy. What do we do in these circumstances? Very often, we point to the other and we say, not only is it your fault, it's your fault because you deceived me. You duplicitous liar, you. This is a hard pill to swallow, I know, because I've been swallowing it for about 10 months and realizing that any of the things that I manifested in my life where I had already made a decision, where my assumptions led to a certain outcome, that's on me. I have to take responsibility for that. No one lied to me. I wasn't deceived. I asked for something. I asked for it over the course of time. I put a lot of energy into it. It actually manifested, and I got what I wanted, and it didn't make me happy. In fact, it made me unhappy. And as we can all relate to, I was in the relationship, whether it was a business relationship, a friendship, a romantic relationship. I expected the other person to act a certain way, to do certain things, to agree. When these things didn't happen, I, of course, blamed them. And usually, in all of the other emotions that were present, whether disappointment or anger or frustration, there is deception. This person is not being who they said they would be. Now, did they ever come out and say they were going to be any person? They were going to represent themselves in any way? That they were going to manifest a certain way? No, that's just the preconceived notion that I have of them. In the actions that they took, in the things that they said, I can then read into, well, this is where they were representing that they were this person that I expected them to be. This is how I interpreted what they said here. This is how I interpreted what they did there. Those interpretations are simply thoughts in your mind. They're not a reality. They're not some objective truth. Working in the law, it was so easy for me, and still is, to come to the conclusion that these lawyers are a bunch of liars. Whether it's people that I've worked for, whether it's counsel that I opposed on certain types of cases, whether or not it's things I was led to believe about other attorneys. No one ever lied to me. I had my own preconceived notions. I had assumptions. And when these things were not met, when the expectation of what I thought would happen did not occur, I had to make an excuse. I believe it's happened to me in the same vein in romantic relationships. Thankfully, and I say this truly because I have a lot of gratitude, thankfully, I've always been blessed with friendships, with people in my life that have been authentic and have allowed me to be authentic. And I haven't run so much into these types of situations when it comes to the circle of friends that I've been able to gather. Business and romance, on the other hand, this was a slap in the face. I couldn't immediately accept it as I was presented with this truth, this being the truth. Hey, you're creating this stuff. You have created the parameters. You've invited these things in. It's almost like it's a vacuum. You're creating this space and there's a vacuum there and something comes to fill the vacuum. And then you make excuses. You rationalize when the thing that comes in to fill the vacuum, the thing that actually fills the space that you created, disappoints you, troubles you, angers you. Now I see it. No one's ever lied to me, and as bitter a pill as it may be for you, dear listener, no one's ever lied to you. Ever. No one's ever misrepresented themselves. We create a space for people to misrepresent themselves because they aren't doing what we expected them to do. They aren't saying the things that we expect them to say. And the first thing that may be coming to your mind as I say this, well, this person cheated on me. Is that not a lie? Is that not deception? We are immature. We are an immature breed of animal. No one has really taught us from a young age how to get into, how to develop a relationship, and no one's counseled us on how to get out of a relationship. When you see people committing adultery are cheating on one another, this is a 4 or 5-year-old's way of saying, I'm going to blow up this relationship. I don't have the courage to actually face this person and tell them, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to blow the whole thing up. And the easiest way to do it is to cheat on them. Now, I hear all of this nonsense around, well, I'm not happy and this is the reason why I'm stepping out. It's silly. You don't want to be in the relationship anymore. You want to blow it up and you cheat. The other person is who they are. You are who you are. And if those things don't mesh, that's okay. If your expectations aren't being met, if preconceived notions are holding you back from allowing this person to authentically be who they are, then let them go. Let them be who they are, and if you can't be with that person, then you can walk away. They aren't lying to you. You aren't lying to them. If the argument is, well, someone told me they were going to the gym on a Tuesday night and they didn't go to the gym, they went and they had sex with somebody else. If that's the argument as to where the lie comes in and the fact that you were deceived, again, you're deceiving yourself. That person is being unfaithful to you. That they lied to you about where they were, their whereabouts on one given night, that is confirmation of the childlike nature of the way that we approach relationships. The fact that we are an immature breed, that you're hanging your hat on not any of the underlying, the fundamental issues with what I'm discussing or what existed in that relationship, but with this person told me they were going to be in location A and they were in location B. Well, aren't you a fucking martyr? These are the types of excuses that we make in order to end up in the same spot that we always find ourselves in. When we invest all of the time, the energy into people, particularly in romantic relationships, then it's hard for us to say, this isn't working. This isn't what I expected it would be. This person isn't who I thought that they were or would be. I need to move on. And I need to do so in a very mature way where I let them know, hey, this isn't working for me. I thought you were this. You're not. I expect that. It's not being met. It's not being realized. Let's move on. These romantic notions about relationships. I see now why I was called to watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. These romantic notions are often complicating the more rational part of us that can look and see what our preconceived notions are, what our assumptions are, what our expectations are, and say, okay, am I allowing this other person to authentically be who they are, or am I trying to put them into this box? Am I trying to create this space and have them fill it, and when it doesn't happen, I get mad, I get upset, I feel like I've been deceived. This is also very important to recognize when we talk about our affinity for public figures, whether they are athletes or musicians or politicians. We create an image of these people. We want people to look up to. We want people to admire, and we want to believe that we can achieve that type of fame, that type of popularity, and be that thing. And so we have assumptions. We create expectations. When these things aren't met, we weren't lied to. We asked for something, it may not have been given, and then we blame the other person. Or we ask for something, we actually get everything that we want, and we look around and we say, I'm not happy. I don't like this. This isn't how I thought I would feel. And then we blame the other person. No one has ever lied to you, dear listener. No one.
Act 2. Money for women, beauty for men.
I was scrolling through the Netflix and I came across a couple of documentaries within the last week, and I don't know why I was drawn to them. I ended up watching them. Now I see that they were part and parcel with what I was going to present in this very segment. The two documentaries were Bad Vegan and The Tinder Swindler. Both of these documentaries involve a man taking advantage of a woman, or in the case of the Tinder Swindler, many women, based on money. Now, that's not how it's presented. When you boil it down, it's about money. and these women being deceived, being conned, according to the way these documentaries are presented by these men. These women were not conned. Not one of them. Not one of them suffered a con. They lied to themselves. They created a vacuum for this thing to exist, and that vacuum was filled. If you ask, ye shall receive. That sounds harsh. I'm not being harsh. This is the way life teaches you lessons. If you create a space for something to happen, and it happens, and it has a very negative, a very destructive outcome on your life, this is how you learn lessons. This is why we are here. Our purpose is to learn. And the best way to learn, unfortunately, is to burn your hand on the stove. You don't know that the types of thoughts that you're thinking, the types of actions that you're taking can create such a detrimental effect unless what? Unless that detrimental effect befalls you. Unless it actually manifests. So how can I say, based on these documentaries that I watched, that these women were all about the money? There was a through line, a common thread between the two of them that stood out to me immediately, slapped me in the face. Just like I say on this podcast, after having sat with Aya 4 nights in a row, very often the truth stares you right in the face. You don't have to go looking for it. There's no investigation. You're no sleuth. It stares you right in the face, and what do? What do I do? We look around it. We actually literally have to expend energy to look around the thing that's staring us in the face that's so true in order to do what? As I said in the first segment, to meet our assumptions, to find where that thing is that's going to be consistent, if you will, with our preconceived notion. Now, I highly recommend that everyone go out and watch these 2 documentaries. I am going to spoil some of it insofar as I need to explain this through line between the 2 of them. In Bad Vegan, a woman goes out and starts an all-vegan restaurant in New York. It's quite popular. She has a partner that she ends up having a romantic relationship with. He's terrible with money. Keep that in mind. That's part of a through line. He's terrible with money. She decides to take on debt from an investor to buy him out so she can have 100% exclusive control of this restaurant. Now she has the debt. And now she's going through the machinations of starting up this restaurant, of getting this thing to a point where not only is it self-sustaining, but it can perhaps grow. The concept can be taken to other cities, and she's got to manage the debt. Debt weighs on people. It doesn't matter who you are, debt weighs on you. She meets a guy, he's mysterious. He has money. He's an international traveler, and he faces danger. That's right, dear listener. He is involved in some sort of black ops, covert military operation where he has to travel overseas and go to dangerous places and do dangerous things. This industry is lucrative and has afforded him a very luxurious lifestyle when he's back in the States. Naturally, as part of the romantic relationship, he promises her that he will pay off the debt that she owes to her investor on the restaurant. As the relationship grows, as the trust builds, he ends up asking her for money, and I won't go into all the details of how he does so or why, which are fascinating. He asks her for money and ends up taking from her almost as much as the original debt that she took out to buy out her last romantic interest in order to acquire the restaurant. The money that she could have used to actually pay off that debt, she ends up giving to this guy. Spoiler alert, not an international traveler, not a man of mystery, in no danger. The life of luxury that he's living is being paid for by this vegan restaurant owner. Not a couple of nights later, I end up watching The Tinder Swindler, a guy who goes on Tinder and meets women utilizing photos of him in private jets, with luxurious cars, in locales all over the world. He represents himself as the heir to a diamond fortune in Israel. because of the high-profile nature of his business, of his family relationship, he's in danger. It's a dangerous business. He has to travel all around the world and deal with nefarious characters, such that he has a bodyguard. Precautions have to be taken. This guy uses money that he gets from woman A and spends it on woman B, and then is able to get money out of woman B, and it's basically a Ponzi scheme. How, you might ask, does he get the money out of these women? What can he say to them? It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You see, his life is in danger. He lives a life of danger. And he can't represent himself as who he is in many of the countries that he's in. He has to take security measures. There's precautions. And so he borrows money, mind you, from these women in these situations where he's being threatened. His life is in danger. And he's going to pay these women back just as soon as he can. In the interviews with the women who allege, who claim, who I think everyone would look at and say, that's a victim. Nefarious actors took advantage of these women. They're victims. They were conned. They were lied to. And you listen to their story about how they got themselves in the situation of trust and intimacy with these men. The first thing that struck me was well-traveled. Someone that's well-traveled, that's a cosmopolitan person. I'm looking for a man that's well-traveled, that's willing to pick up and just go places, that has that sense of adventure. It stuck in my head when I was watching the first documentary, Bad Vegan, but it really slapped me in the face when I was watching The Tinder Swindler. Missionaries are cosmopolitan, well-traveled people. Missionaries are fucking broke. Aid workers are cosmopolitan, well-traveled people. Aid workers for humanitarian organizations are fucking broke. The second thing that came through was the fact that these men were such good listeners. They were able to develop rapport so quickly, and these women felt like they knew this person so well at a very early stage in the relationship. And this slapped me right in the face, not in the second documentary, not in The Tinder Swindler. It hit me right in the face during the first documentary, Bad Vegan. It was double down. I mean, it hit me like an anvil during The Tinder Swindler. These guys aren't telling you anything about themselves. They're letting you talk as much as humanly possible because they can't tell you anything about themselves. They can't reveal anything. And if we were a fly on the wall during those conversations, they very likely were evasive around answering any true personal questions about themselves. What did Dale Carnegie say in How to Win Friends and Influence People? Take a genuine interest in others. No one likes to talk about anything more than they like to talk about themselves. These women sat with these men having no real ambition to find out deeply and truly who they were. They created an image of who these men were, and with very, very shallow inquiries, had the confirmation that they wanted. They wanted these men to be rich. They wanted them to be cosmopolitan. And although they never admitted it, it was blatantly apparent. They were aroused. They were turned on by the fact that these guys had an edge, that they lived a life of mystery, of international intrigue, of danger. They weren't looking for people who were financially stable, who had successful, rewarding careers. They were looking for luxury. This person has money to burn. This person goes first class everywhere they go. That's who I am. That's where I see myself. First class everywhere that I go. Money is no object. Evaluate it, dear listener. Once you've sold yourself on that's what this is, that's what's manifested in my life, you'll make any sacrifice to hold on to that. There is no sacrifice too great to hold on to that image, no matter how absurd the story is. In both of these through lines, in Bad Vegan, in The Tinder Swindler, the evidence that was proffered by these people was scant. It was really laughably scant. And that's what I could not avoid as I was watching this, how the presentation to the viewer tried to manipulate the viewer into believing, look, these guys were telling credible stories. This is a con. These people were taken in by a sophisticated ruse. It was not a sophisticated ruse. These were not sophisticated actors. They were giving a story that on its face to me looked laughable, and yet these women were taken in by it because they wanted to believe it was true. This met with an expectation that they had of where they would be in their life. I marry rich. I'm taken care of. And this person is everything that I ever wanted him to be as a partner, as a lover, as a father to my children. And he has that edge. He's been out there in the world. He's done dangerous things. This is a strong man, a virile man, a man that stands up to treachery, to his enemies, to the enemies of hope, of justice, of truth. There's really this James Bond type element to it in both stories, in both cons. And what I found hilarious about how hollow's the word I'm looking for, how hollow these stories were. James Bond didn't get caught needing $25,000 because he couldn't use his own identity in a dangerous situation where his enemies were pursuing him. James Bond had funds that he could use. He had resources. He was that international, that cosmopolitan actor that could get through these situations. He didn't need to have a woman wire him $25,000 because he couldn't use his credit card as his enemies were tracking his online history. The heir to a diamond fortune is incapable of reaching out to family or a business accomplice, a friend, the organization itself, the company itself, to obtain any type of financial assistance. No, the person he needs to get the money from is a woman that he met 60, 90 days prior. And it just so happens that he says, I love you. This sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? Believe me, I rejected it for close to 10 months. That I built the parameters, a box, if you will, of how I was going to see the world, of things that I wanted to manifest, and rejected outright anything that defied my preconceived notions. You inviting something in and you deserving the consequences of it, that can be a bitter pill to swallow. If you look at it in the aggregate and you say to me, well, none of these women deserve to be bilked for $250,000 of their money. I say to you, at $60,000, what was that woman thinking? At $85,000, what was that woman thinking? It's easy to simply watch a documentary and be led along and sit in judgment of this man and the way that he is manipulating these women with their emotions and the things that he's telling them. It's binary. There's a white hat and a black hat. There's a good guy and a bad guy. The story that wasn't told is the fact that these women were hanging on to a vision, to a dream. They had created this preconceived outcome. They made these assumptions. They then plastered those assumptions all over these men. And then when it started to slip away, they couldn't give it up. They couldn't realize $100,000 in, this guy's conning me. This guy isn't who he says he is. Because they didn't want to let go the possibility, I'm not going to be swept away like a princess into the lap of luxury where money is no object, where I get the man of my dreams. He meets all of my wildest expectations. I'm not going to have to go back to this reality, this truth, where none of that is real. and in fact, I'm being taken advantage of. It is our faith in these assumptions, in these expectations, in these preconceived notions that allows others to take advantage of us. If in fact, you can even say that we're being taken advantage of. We're getting something. We're actually being fulfilled in a way. I want something. This thing is manifested. I'm not letting it go. No matter what evidence I get to the contrary, I'm not letting it go. That's how these men can get millions of dollars out of these women, offering up the scantest of evidence. It's not the evidence. It's not the objective truth, dear listener, that we're married to. It's the idea. It is our imagination. It's the things that we assume, the things that we expect. When our imagination has taken hold and we want to believe these things to be true, there's nothing we won't do in order to hold on to it. For women, it is money. Money means security. I stated it plainly, and it's the truth. Debt weighs on people. No one wants to have debt weighing over them. Financial freedom, stability, security, that's very attractive to any of us. It makes an older, fatter, egotistical, type A personality man seem more youthful, trim, direct, passionate. What about men? What about men? Well, the girl with the double D chest, platinum blonde hair, likely with extensions, that waist that looks like she hasn't eaten for a month and spent that entire time in the gym. Beauty attracts. Men look for beauty. The deception for a man is that a woman 20 years his junior, who even on his best day was 10 times more attractive than him, who has very little in common with him, that woman loves him. That woman wants to spend the rest of her life with him. Now, I don't have a documentary that I can point you to in order to illustrate this point. What I will do is invite you to a magical place, one of the most special places on planet Earth, Old Town Scottsdale. If you're the adventurous type, if you're one of those pioneers looking to explore, I'd send you even into Arcadia. I'd send you into North Scottsdale. You can see it play out every single evening. You don't need a documentary for that point, dear listener. There's no better place on earth to come and see it than Scottsdale, Arizona. Young women, older men. Older men convincing themselves of something that, on its face, simply isn't true. And you can engage these men. Oh, they'll speak boldly about the fact that they know that this isn't reality. But when that little girl comes cooing in his ear, he goes and not only opens the checkbook, but opens his heart, time and time again. If you are bewildered, spellbound by that beauty, and create the parameters, these assumptions that I need to have X, Y, and Z, and I'll find in that person all the qualities that I want once I identify double D breasts, platinum blonde hair, a waistline with rock hard abs. That woman didn't lie to you. That woman was exactly what you wanted. You manifested that. You called it, or better said, called for it. You asked, it was given. That she is then having sex with a guy her own age behind your back, using your money to go out and party. Is she lying? Did she lie to you? You saw what you wanted to see. You heard what you wanted to hear. Whether that girl actually had any inner beauty, actually exemplified the qualities that you're looking for in another human being, that was completely overlooked by those big blue eyes, by those big D breasts. And when all the evidence to the contrary started to amass, starts to mount, that man starts to make excuses. He starts to justify in his mind why those things aren't real, because if they are real, the vision of what he has manifested slips away. I'll conclude this segment with a piece that I remember watching on the HBO docudrama about Bernie Madoff. It was the interview that he had with a journalist in jail right before he died. And she's asking him and then quite aggressively grilling him on the things that he did, the lies that he told, how he manipulated people, all the harm that it caused. And Madoff did something that I find very interesting. As I have noted on this podcast quite frequently, two things can be correct at the same time. Two things that appear to be an opposite of one another, that appear to contradict one another. And it doesn't make anyone virtuous. It doesn't make anyone's position virtuous. But two things can be correct at the same time. Two people can hold a correct position at the same time, even though those positions appear to be contradicting one another. Madoff kept telling the woman they were greedy. They were taken in by their own greed. I was only able to do what I did because they were greedy. I told them things that they wanted to hear because it met with their greed. This journalist, in what I perceived as a fit of frustration, said to Madoff, "You're in denial. You're denying this." And he was quite defensive. And he kept saying they were greedy. What I interpreted him saying is, I could not have taken advantage of them if they hadn't created the space for me to take advantage of them. They had a greedy and unrealistic dream, and I was there to meet it. I never lied to these people. They lied to themselves, and I was there to fulfill that lie.
Act 3. Cognitive dissonance, stop the steal, and donating to Trump.
The January 6th hearings that have gone on over the course of the last week, this podcast being recorded the week of June 12th or Monday, June 13th. These hearings haven't had a ton of new information. There's some video footage that people hadn't seen before. Yet the story remains the same as the story that we all knew as of January 30th of 2021. One of the revelations, though, that I found interesting, and I'm sure you did too, dear listener, was the fact that in raising money for his Stop the Steal campaign, Donald Trump actually amassed $250 million. Many of the donors being middle class or lower middle class, small dollar donors. As we've discussed on the podcast in the past, the Stop the Steal movement is complete and total bullshit. And you need no more proof of that than the lawsuits that were filed in support of Stop the Steal. They were so scant. They were so void of any proof of any election fraud that they were laughed out of court by conservative Republican judges. In order to frame this piece for Stop the Steal, these donations to Trump, and whether or not any of these people were lied to, were deceived, were conned, were ripped off, I want to start with something that I've referred to over the course of the time that I've had this podcast. I say it over and over again, the concept, the theory of cognitive dissonance. This is a theory whereby you can hold two separate, diametrically opposed thoughts in your head at the same time and act on both of them, even though acting on them contradicts each one of the beliefs that you hold. This theory was developed in the 1950s, the mid-1950s, and I want to talk about the story of how it was developed. Three behavioral scientists in the 1950s in Minnesota begin befriending, if you will, starting to work with a group that they very quickly identify as a cult. And in this cult, there's a belief that there's going to be a major flood event at the end of the year around Christmas time, whereby the world will be underwater, most people will die. And the adherents, the followers of this cult leader, they are going to be saved by extraterrestrials. An alien spaceship is going to come to Earth prior to the flood event, is going to evacuate them, then the Earth will be flooded, they will be saved. I don't want to spoil the story for you, dear listener. That flood event, it didn't happen. These behavioral scientists befriended these folks well enough that they were there watching with them the Descent of the spaceship that never came. What do you think the cult leader said after this event did not occur? The cult leader told the followers, the adherents, that it was going to occur in another 48 hours. And then after that 48 hours expired, then it was a test of their will. It was a test of their faith. These behavioral scientists thought, okay, this cult is going to completely fall apart. People are going to start to backbite. There's going to be dissension in the ranks. People are just going to defect and leave. To their amazement, everybody doubled down. There were a few defectors. There were a few people chirping. But most of these adherents doubled down. They were more adamant that this thing was going to occur, that there was going to be this water, this flood event, and that they were going to be saved by the aliens than they were prior to their disappointment that it hadn't happened near Christmas. They were so married to the idea, they so believed that they couldn't allow that dream to slip away. The vision, the parameters that they had created, the assumptions, the preconceived notions. So one of the scientists, he developed and actually wrote a book and pioneered this whole concept of cognitive dissonance, that you can create in your mind such expectations by way of assumption, by way of preconceived notions, that none of the facts that manifest in your existence will defy or change your mind as to what those assumptions are, what those preconceived notions are, and how the world should comport to those things. Not only that, but people would act in accord with some of the things that were manifesting, some of the realities, and still believe, well, even though I'm having to do this, even though these things are occurring, the water event's still going to happen. The aliens are still going to come and save us. Fast forward to 2020 with Trump and Stop the Steal. People were convinced that the election was stolen. There was nothing that you could propose to them that would change their mind. There was no evidence that the election was stolen, and they didn't need any. They had already made the assumptions, they had the preconceived notions, everything that occurred in the world had to fit into that box. And one of the things that had to occur in the world was that they were going to fight. They weren't going to let this injustice stand. And so Trump, being perhaps the greatest salesman, if not con man, that's ever lived, he actually went out and started these nonprofit foundations whereby people could donate and it would fund the fight to overturn what was a fraudulent election. What do you think the mindset was of the people who were giving that money? It didn't matter what any of the facts were. They weren't giving the money because factually there was so much evidence that there was a fraudulent election, that there were a bunch of uncounted ballots or that there were fraudulent ballots cast. There was no evidence of that. And to the extent that there was evidence of that, it was absolute nonsense. So they were just believing whatever they could find that would support that preconceived notion, the assumptions that they had made. Their money happily left their wallets. After all the lawsuits were thrown out of court, these nonprofit organizations, they continued to exist and they continued to ask people for money. And people continued to give it. This notion that these people were deceived, that they were lied to, that all the Democrats have to do is go and have these hearings on January 6th and prove to the American people that this was all a big con, that is the Democrats simply demonstrating again they really don't know much about politics and how to operate within a political environment. The people that have bought into this theory, they didn't need Donald Trump to trumpet that actual theory for them to carry it in their hearts, for them to promote it on social media. These are things that they've believed for years. That vacuum existed. That open space had been created. Donald Trump simply filled it. Were these people who gave all that money ripped off? No, they were not. They were happy to give that money because they believed that the election had been stolen. And you say, well, shouldn't they get some kind of benefit for that bargain? Shouldn't there be some more effort on behalf of the Trump campaign in order to dispute the outcome of the election? Shouldn't that money be used for its intended purpose and not simply to line the pockets of Trump, his family, and friends? And I ask you, dear listener, why? The lawsuits were filed. The outcome was determined. That Trump is able to still go out and say, we're going to continue to fight with no evidence whatsoever that A, the election was stolen, and B, that they actually are going to continue to fight. Why did these people get ripped off? They wanted to give that money. That money was their manifestation, a representation of the way that they felt and the fact that they wanted to continue to fight. They wanted to continue to believe. I offer this to you, dear listener. I don't believe that any of them in their heart of hearts want the election to be overturned. They like sitting in this vibration of defiance. The money allows them to further sit in that vibration. The through line in all of this to me is clear. You make up your mind about something. You've got the assumptions that are associated with it. You've got the preconceived notion. You're creating the space. Something comes and fills that space. Who's the victim? Who's the victim? Life is trying to teach you a lesson. If you fail to learn that lesson, even after you've lost all your money, that is on you. That money going out the door is the universe giving you the signal you've created a terrible, terrible preconceived notion here. Your assumptions are faulty. And this space that you've created is negative for you and for your environment. If our response to that, dear listener, is, go to hell, I'm not letting go of this vision, this dream that I've created, because then where will I be? I'll be back to this stagnant, this boring, this mundane, this routine existence. I'd rather be broke and destitute than wrong. Well, the universe is going to give you what you want again. You will be broke and destitute. If that's what it takes for you to see the light, the universe is all the more willing to provide. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.